Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland Retrospective here on the SPDM Crew Podcasting Network. And this is my weekly show where my collaborator, my guest, and I each pick a film related in some shape or form. And then hopefully by the end of this episode, you have two films to go check out. And joining me for our monthly episode is my buddy Jeff. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on.
Of course, thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. And we're getting a little weird with our romances for this particular episode as we talk about a couple of genre bending romance films where we have Warm Bodies from 2013, a dark romantic zombie comedy. And then we'll be talking about another film, a little bit different tone, from 2014. A girl walks home alone at night. No zombies, but we got vampires. But let's get started with Warm Bodies. Jeff, what were your general thoughts on the film?
So I'm pretty sure I saw this movie in the theater when it came out, and I don't think I've watched it again since until I watched it for this podcast.
Mhm.
I actually really like this movie. It was kind of the start of me like knowing who Nicholas Hoult was. I had seen him in
Mhm.
the X-Men movie reboot before this, and I think it was the first movie I ever seen Teresa Palmer in as well. Um, but I remember really liking this movie when it came out. I thought it was just witty and funny, and
Mhm.
I was a bit, I'm a big, I don't want to say a big rom-com person, but it was checking all the boxes for rom-coms that I was looking for, and so I was all in on it. But it's got some really good funny moments. It's got a great soundtrack, and
Mhm.
I really like it.
I thought this was a really charming film, and
Hmm.
especially after, because like this was the first time I watched this, and after we talked about 50-50 on one of our other episodes very recently, seeing Jonathan Levine do you know kind of subverting that expectation of a genre, because
Hmm.
like 50-50, you expected that to be a silly like stoner comedy with Seth Rogen, but like there's a lot of emotion there, and this finds some good emotion. There's some good humor. Probably the biggest thing that didn't work as well for me is when this kind of turned into a bit of a action thriller towards the end of the film, which also like they're creepy to look at, but like this definitely looks like smaller budget 2013 effects for like these other types of zombies that I'm trying to think, like they looked oddly familiar, and I was trying to think of like what they reminded me of, but like you could definitely tell there's some like broad stroke design because it's like we don't have a lot of money here. We're not going to make this too complicated. But
Hmm.
I think the idea of this film, where it's like, hey, we're following a zombie around who thinks and feels, and this whole idea of them like slowly warming up and becoming human again was a really interesting idea, and I think they really executed that well.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they every movie kind of does zombies a little differently, and
Mhm.
I kind of like because of its lighter tone. I like the way they kind of went about zombies in this one, where they kind of have like they're like I love like the moment where like Nicholas Hoult and Rob Corddry are sitting at like that bar and they're just like grunting to each other like as if they're having a conversation. That
Mhm.
always makes me laugh.
Yeah, and you start with all the stereotypes, and like at one point it's like walk like a zombie. And like that whole entire sequence, like Teresa Palmer had some fun with that one, you can tell.
Yeah.
It's like tone it down a little. And I think Nicholas Hoult is very charismatic in this.
Hmm.
You need somebody that you can connect with and empathize with because you're in their head this whole entire film through whatever struggles they're dealing with, like these like flashes of memories of you have Dave Franco's character, um, who does not last long in this movie, for sure. And you have all of these challenging things and this budding romance, and I bought into it. I like the
Yeah.
charm that the two of them had. These are two attractive people with some good charisma, and they match well together. Obviously, Nicholas Holt starting off as a zombie is a interesting twist on that. And I think they have some good chemistry together. And they spend a decent amount of like the first half of this film with them, building this connection. And I think the film does that well. John Malkovich is just kind of John Malkoviching a little bit as like the leader of the humans that are left. Rob,
Yeah, he's to me he just seems like he's getting a paycheck.
yeah,
No, he's
there's
not he's not springing any bones or anything. He's just there.
there's not a whole lot to his character except like antagonist potential, and that's
Hmm.
about it. I loved Rob Corddry in this. I thought he
Yeah,
was such
he's
an
great.
interesting addition, and he even has like some of his moments, and there's some like really endearing moments towards the end with his character. I'm just like, oh, and because like I'm pretty sure the main thing I know him from is Hot Tub Time Machine, and he's he's that guy in
Hmm.
that movie, and I appreciate what he brings to this. And you know, it's hard decades after George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead to like make a zombie movie feel fresh. And
Hmm.
this felt fresh. I think it had a really clever concept, very clever conceit. They build up to it well. Like I mentioned, I think I get a little bit less interested when it goes full blown, like we're going to war,
Right.
kind of thing. I think it gets a little too big, and I don't think this movie's strengths were like I didn't expect to go into this movie for like a zombie action flick, and it gets a little bit of that. And but overall, I really enjoyed this from start to finish, and I distinctly remember when this movie came out too. And I don't know why I was averse to seeing it at the time, but this is my first time watching this, and it definitely has some really good charm. And this is something I would definitely go back to. And like you mentioned, it has a really good soundtrack too.
Hmm.
It has some really good music choices.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely one that I kind of regret not watching earlier.
Mhm.
Again, after I'd seen it the first time, because I just remembered like watching it this time and just remembering how much I loved just these little moments, like the whole, pretend to be a zombie while you're walking around these all other zombies, and like the music choices. There's a bunch of songs in there that like when I had seen it, I was already like, oh, I love this song so much, and then I saw it in the
Mhm.
movie. I'm like, oh my god, they're using that song I love. Like it was just really great to have those moments when I was watching it for the first time.
Yeah, because there's a couple of needle drops in it where I'm just like, yes, this
Yep.
strikes a chord and strikes a memory,
Hmm.
because of like the timing of the music and when this came out. But no, I was pretty adverse to Nicholas Holt because of the X-Men movies. Because like I'm a huge Beast fan, and I
Yeah,
never
you're
liked
not a
how
fan
they
of Beast in that movie,
I'm not a fan of how they handled Beast in it. I don't think it's Nicholas Holt's fault. I just don't like the approach that they go with that character.
right?
Like Kelsey Graham, will always be my Beast. That was such inspired casting. But over the years, seeing Nicholas Holt in different things, like I just got to see Nosferatu, and he does a lot of great things with that too. But like he's a really talented actor, and he's a pretty versatile actor too.
Hmm.
Even just recently with Juror number two, well, actually, he's having quite the 2024 to be honest, because he had The Order, Juror number two, and Nosferatu all coming
Yeah.
out this fall and into the winter. And let's not forget the Garfield movie. Um,
And fortuitous today, we're talking about Nicholas Holt because the Superman trailer dropped, and he
yes,
looks pretty
and
looks pretty good in it.
I am very interested to see him as Lex Luthor because I
Me
know
too.
he tried to be Batman, he tried to be Superman, and like I don't see him in
I don't see
those
him as
roles.
either of those, but I can
No,
definitely see him as Lex Luthor.
and I think that like he's finding better places for his towns. Like The Great, that
Yeah.
show, he ate that up. That's probably the most entertaining that I've seen him in anything. But no, this has a charming cast, and like like I mentioned, Dave Franco's not in it a lot, but like you get a little Dave Franco. Also like Leo Tipton from Crazy Stupid Love. She's not in it
Yeah.
a whole lot either, but yeah, this is
She's
a
in it enough. She's in it
yeah.
enough. And it was
She
in this, and I remember watching this movie right around the time where I saw Crazy Stupid Love for the first
mhm.
time. I was like, "Oh yeah, it's that girl. I like that girl."
Yeah, I really liked her in Crazy Stupid Love, and like I'll occasionally see her popping up in things. But
Mhm.
this has a lot of charm, great concept, good charismatic cast. Now, something pretty different, but kind of still going along the lines of like this dark kind of romance with, horror movie monsters in them. We have A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, and this is from 2014 from director Anna Lily Amirpour. And this film focuses on a in an Iranian ghost town, Bad City, a place that reeks of death and loneliness. The townspeople are unaware that they're being stalked by a lonesome vampire. And so, Jeff, what were your general thoughts on this one?
I had never heard about this movie until you said that we were going to watch it, and I when I looked at the cast on like IMDb, and I saw a few names that I know of. Like I'm very familiar with Sheila Vand. I've watched a
Hmm.
few shows with her. I've watched that movie she was in a couple years ago called The Rental. Um,
Hmm.
there was that Marshall Manesh. He was Ranjit from How I Met Your Mother, who I adore. I love that show. And then there was another couple actors here and there that I've seen in a few things. But I watched this movie, and it's done very well. I think the black and white is an interesting choice. I'm just there's something about this movie that just didn't quite grab me though. By the end of watching it, I was just kind of like, eh, it's not a bad movie, but it just didn't pull me in.
I think probably the biggest thing that's going to attract people is like this is a gorgeously shot film. Like that
Yeah.
black and white just looks gorgeous, and it also invokes a very specific vibe that like the fact that this is a ghost town and
Hmm.
it's happening a lot at night, I think really works for its advantage with like the how it's shot. I think the cinematography is great with like the lighting and the shadows, and like even just like little costume designs, like the choice of what uh our vampire the girl is wearing and stuff like that. I think there's a few scenes in this
Hmm.
that really stick out. Like that whole entire scene building up to like the reveal, where it's just like, oh, I wish I didn't know this was a vampire movie going in,
Hmm.
and imagining what that scene would be like, where it's just like fangs. I'm just like, what? Because like there's quite a few films I'm like, can you imagine if you knew nothing about this movie going in and how shocking that would be when something happens like that. But I think Sheila Vand, I really liked her in this. I think that it's a scattered kind of story because it has a bunch of different characters that you're kind of dabbling in, and it gets a little complicated with
Hmm.
some of the characters in terms of like, do we empathize for them, and like what happens to them, is that too harsh? Because the whole entire idea is that this vampire's stalking men that do bad things to women, and some of them it's like very obvious. It's like, yes, this person in this context where vampires exist totally would deserve getting some vengeance on them. But
Hmm.
like I know specifically like Hussein the junkie, like you have that character like built up throughout the film where it's like you see him and get to spend some time with him leading up to the point where it's just like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. I feel like this film, I don't know if I got all that I needed to out of this the first time watching this. Because it's very subtle, it's very methodical too. Because like this film's not very long. It's like a
Yeah.
100 minutes, but it really does take its time building up to things, processing this budding connection between like some of the characters and like even specifically like the romance of it, which I feel like takes a little while to even start building up to in the story. I appreciate the atmosphere. I appreciate how like the technical aspects of this, and it's an interesting idea. I like the like this is some kind of like ghost town where things aren't going so hot in this small town, and
Hmm.
um like some of the seedier people in here have to look over their shoulder. And also the conceit of a female vampire rolling around on the skateboard's kind of an interesting thing to throw in there too.
Yeah, it had some like kind of like moments where I chuckled a little bit, like the moment where she gets the skateboard from the kid and then she starts riding around on the skateboard. I'm like, that was kind of funny. Like there were some like a few unexpected funny moments in this. I
Mhm,
also going back to a point we talked about earlier, like this movie also had some interesting needle drop moments. It had some good
mhm.
a good soundtrack to it. There's a few songs I had to Shazam and be like, oh, this is an awesome song. I like this.
Like, and it I think like the music, how it's shot, that all goes together. And like this is a vibes film for sure.
Yeah.
Because like it doesn't have a very tight focused narrative that this
Hmm.
is trying to tell. So in a film like that, you need to be able to have some kind of atmosphere that's gonna draw you in. And I
Yeah.
think it does have that. I think, like I mentioned, I think it's an interesting idea and concept and setting. It's just you're just really living in with some of these characters. And like I don't know how much I really got invested in this romance that was building up, and I feel like that was one of the big threads of the film. But I I enjoyed the atmosphere. That went a long way for me. And I
Hmm.
think there's some good performances and some standout scenes that happened and some good tension because like just the idea of this specter like off in the background, like that whole scene in the with the car and the pimp,
Yeah.
and then realizing it's like there's this woman like creeping out that way and having that kind of tension and really working in that way. So I think I like this more than you did probably, but I think we're both kind of on the same page that like this is something that's kind of just like you're floating by a little bit in terms of
Yeah.
like story wise and character wise and what you're really connecting with.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think it's a bad movie. I think it's actually very well done. It's being that it only had a budget of like $1 million, like which is a very low budget, being
Mhm,
someone who's produced films before. I mean, that's a pretty low budget as far as films. I mean, it shows. It doesn't look amazing, but it looks very good for what it is.
mhm,
Um, but I mean, but there's just something about it that just it didn't just pull me in, and I ended up finding myself just kind of just in the middle about it. It's not a bad movie, but I'm like, it's not a great movie. I'm not gonna watch it again personally, but
I
I don't
think
know.
that I think I'm at that point where it's like enough of this got me that I want to come back to this at some point and
Okay.
see if some of the other stuff resonates enough. But I also like I could go pretty strongly based off of vibes of a film, and this certainly
Hmm.
has some really great atmosphere to kind of get lost in. But kudos to Amrapur who created really eerie and atmospheric film from just noticing this is from Vice Films and Kino Lorber. So
Yeah, I noticed that on the opening credits. I was like, Vice Films. Wow.
mhm. The Kino Lorber part, I'm like, oh, so I see this is indeed art house cinema.
Hmm.
Because they do not deal in the most mainstream accessible of films. But like, I remember the reputation of this movie. I did not remember a whole lot. Like, I didn't really know much about it, but it certainly got a decent amount of attention at some awards ceremonies and and festivals all around the place. So this definitely is like an eerie and interesting kind of take on a vampire story. So if you got anything, we took some very interesting different kind of takes on some like classic movie monsters. Got some zombies and got some vampires for you. Jeff, do you have any other thoughts on A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night?
No, no, I got nothing to say about it. Like I said before, it's fine, but I'm not gonna, you know, waste another time watching it. I've got other things I need to watch before this.
Well, it might not have gotten the highest ratings of films we've talked about, but it's certainly one of the longest titles. So there you go. Has that going for it. But that's a wrap for this episode of the Wasteland Retrospective. Next week will be my next episode with my wife Jess as we talk about True Grit and No Country for Old Men. We have a double dose of some Cohen's westerns and neo westerns. And next month, Jeff and I are going to be talking about a pair of coming of age summer stories, The Kings of Summer and The Way, Way Back. So, but Jeff, thank you as always for coming on and talking movies with me.
Of course, anytime.
And thank all of you for listening. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode. What's your favorite, like, interesting kind of shake up of a classic movie monster genre? Um, there's certainly a lot of interesting ones out there. Colossal's definitely one that stands out to me of like a kaiju movie that does not go in the direction that you expect it to go. But and make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. The SPDM Crew Podcasting Network has a lot of great content about whether it's movies, television, music, physical media, comic books, sports, and, just talking about life with Luke. So make sure to check out all of our great content. And if you like our logo, check out HiFlyer Creative. They do some good work. But most importantly, thank you as always for tuning in and supporting the Wasteland Retrospective here on the SPDM Crew Podcasting Network.